Hello and welcome to Health in Boston. So excited to be here. This is my hometown and it's an absolutely beautiful day. I'm excited to welcome Kate Ryder, the CEO of Maven. Kate, welcome. And why don't we start by just having you share a little bit about yourself?
Well, I live in Brooklyn. I have 3 kids and I started Maven 7 years ago.
Great, well, thank you. I happen to know quite a bit about you, but why don't you talk a little bit about your journey from being a journalist to deciding to start a women's healthcare company?
Sure. So my dad is an entrepreneur. So when I was a journalist, I realized at a certain point that I was going to try to start a business. I tried to start my first business off the back of one of my stories when I was living in Singapore, not in healthcare. And so when eventually I spent that short stint in venture capital, kind of trying to figure out what business to start, I fell backwards into digital health and just couldn't believe that the industry, which was dominated by the female consumer and dominated by kind of the chief medical officer of one's home, which often was the woman, but sometimes the man, that they were so underserved as a healthcare consumer. And so, and particularly in that moment when you're thinking about starting a family and growing one, there's so many different pathways to parenthood, whether it's through fertility or adoption or surrogacy. And then when you're pregnant, that's one of the biggest moments, I think, of a young woman's life, or a medium-aged woman, depending on when you have the kids. And then also those early years of pediatrics are so heady, and they really kind of dictate how a child's health is going to be for the rest of their life. And so, when I was working at this venture capital firm, it was just incredible to see so many male entrepreneurs innovating in healthcare, in really important spaces, but there was no one doing anything for the female who was so underserved. So I thought that was an obvious opportunity and privilege to be able to start a company that was really focused on this point. And, with me, I have 3 kids, and I knew that it was going to disproportionately affect me. I'm the patient. I've used Maven, throughout each of my pregnancies. And so I think I knew I also could bring that unique perspective to it of all of the areas that are so underserved that people don't often talk about, like miscarriage or postpartum depression or pelvic floor issues, that was going to be part of Maven's care model.
Well, as you know, we have been following you even before we invested, since 2014 when you started the company. So let's talk about that journey. So when you first started, you started as a direct-to-consumer company. Mm-hmm. You evolved to an employer company, and now you've added payer to the mix. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that evolution and some of the amazing growth that we've seen in the last couple of years.
To really put the patient first, I knew that we had to have a product that the patient loved. And so when we launched in 2014, we launched with a telemedicine platform, and with a lot of different types of providers. One of the unique components of our care model is that we bring today about 30 different types of providers in women's and family health together in care teams to really help somebody through their journey. And so if someone's starting in IVF and then moving into pregnancy and then moving into early pediatrics, they have reproductive endocrinologists and nutritionists and OBs and pediatricians and mental health providers all on one platform. So that was really unique. And I knew that, that's also a hard, a new behavior, a hard way to kind of start in care delivery. And so I just wanted to make sure that we were delighting the patient. And so when we launched, we spent about a year just honing that product, really constantly tracking the metrics around engagement, satisfaction after an appointment, the star ratings on our providers, repeat rates. And then finally when we were ready, and I was fortunate because I'd worked in this venture capital firm, I knew we had to move into B2B. When we were ready, we ended up selling our first employer contracts in about 2016. So the Clinton Foundation was our first client. And it was hard in those days because, again, we were creating a category. Maternity benefits was mostly just owned by the payers, their maternity management programs. But we brought a much more holistic view where we incorporated postpartum and return to work. And we launched our fertility product in 2017. And so, we needed to basically educate the market that the way in which employers and payers were approaching families and women primarily was all wrong. And so, we spent a few years just what felt like pushing a boulder uphill on the employer front, getting one employer here, another employer there, while kind of also pushing our consumer product out to constantly just be building brand equity and understanding our product with the patient. And then finally in about 2017, that was when we got our first verbal from a Fortune 50 who, Bank of America and Jim Huffman over there at the time was just so critical to kind of understanding our vision. He had seen so many issues in his own population around family building. He knew that it was an underserved area. And so that was a major validation point. Oak kind of invested right after that. And that what they say on the employer market is once you get some of the thought leaders, then a lot of other people will come and believe. And so we so then 2018, 2019, we really started to get other kind of Fortune 50s, a lot more employers. We started to see RFPs for the first time. And then around that time was when the payers, looked up and said, oh, okay, there's more vendors entered our category who may or may not have copied us in some areas, but that's fine. More pressure on the buyer. I think one of the best parts of our category and, now that we sell to patients, but primarily the buyers, employers, and payers, there's not only kind of a feel-good DEI sell, but there's also an affordability sell, and maternity is such a high-cost area. And so as we've kind of jumped from employers who sometimes buy us for talent attraction and retention, some of them do buy us for cost-cutting, but a lot of it is around, retaining women in the workforce, having an inclusive pathway to parenthood for LGBTQ families. Now that we're jumping to payers, we have had so much data and we've honed our clinical model through the years that as the payers are really looking for the ability to reduce maternity-related costs, which are some of their highest cost areas, we're able to actually now bring that. And so that's now we are working with payers. And then, where we're going next, which is super exciting, is we've been working with the commercial population of payers, and we still work with tons of employers, and we want more employers, is Medicaid. So 1 out of 2 births are in the Medicaid population, and so by now working with a lot of payers with our commercial populations, a lot of them are now asking us to, what do we have for Medicaid? So we're launching our first Medicaid populations next year.
So it's super exciting. So that was an incredible history. And as one of your board members, we obviously track all of it, but we've got some incredible metrics. I think we've added 4 Fortune 15 companies on the employer side.
In the last 18 months.
In the last 18 months, which is really a tribute to the product and how excited people are about using it. So you mentioned Medicaid. Tell me why that's important. What is the job to be done in that market?
Yeah, so this, I think, really gets into the values with which we're building the business. And so you cannot work in maternal health if you do not work in the Medicaid population and have the real impact that you want to have. Because if 1 out of 2 births are on the Medicaid population, that's where there's the highest rate of maternal death. That's where a lot of the terrible stats around, Black mothers dying at 3 times the rate of white mothers in childbirth in this country. A lot of things, like where there's massive health inequities, massive disparities, particularly around social determinants that we've seen with COVID, that's really where there's so much need. And so we can't have impact according to our mission if we're not going into that population. And I think, what we've been able to do on our commercial side, which is innovate with a new care model for women and families in commercial populations, bring LGBTQ health into the mix, bring kind of postpartum and mental health into the mix. With Medicaid, we're taking that same approach. We're looking at, from a bottoms-up perspective, what is the core customer journey that women and families are facing? And it's very different per state. It's different whether you live rural. It's different whether you live urban. But how do we really bring a better virtual model to that part of the population? And so that's why we're doing it. But I also think there's just such a tremendous opportunity. It goes into kind of how our entire product roadmap works, which is, the amount of personalization that you need to bring to all of your patients, is really critical. So the way we like to say it is, whether it's Medicaid population, whether it's a commercial population that's a retail workforce with a lot of people on and off Medicaid, that's kind of how we look at it.
Yeah, and as a firm, we're constantly talking about sub populations, so that these are not monolithic groups.
Yeah.
And so we have seen that in spades, and that's the success of Maven up to now, which is to meet the needs of these different categories. So this is really a natural extension to just go to that next level. So let's talk about the last few months since your fundraise. 110 million brings you over 200 million in financing. You've got a lot of press. It was
we have
fantastic.
an amazing comms team. Yes.
Oh no, it was an amazing story, and there was a lot of stories in the stories, but I'll just focus on one that was really prevalent, which was the unicorn story. So that got to valuation, first unicorn in the space. Couple things. One is just your reaction to that, having met you in a shared space and meeting with you in something the size of a telephone booth originally, and just all your hard work to get the company where it is. And then with this infusion of cash, what are you focusing on? You just talked about Medicaid, but I think there's some other things.
As we think about the next 5 years, I'm happy that we are so relentlessly focused on the patient, and that we started 7 years ago, because we've been able to build a really amazing platform. I mean, our platform works. I can tell you as a patient, our platform works. I think in this kind of frenzied era of digital health, where if you started 3 years ago and then COVID's hit, you're under tremendous pressure to grow and raise a bunch of money and sell a bunch of clients, but the clients only have so much time to implement so many new solutions. So there's a lot more snake oil and vaporware that we've seen in the market, which is really dangerous for patients. And I think with us, having this status and the type of attention and quite frankly, new clients it will bring, we're really proud because we can handle it. I mean, that's why we raised so much money. As our lead investor, Dragoneer, did 30 customer calls and heard that, we deliver. And we have over a 70 NPS for our patients. We have a 91 client NPS. We deliver and we'll continue to deliver, and we're not going to be pushed by the demands of the market to deliver a bad product ever. We're going to consistently maintain our high level of quality, because that's what gets impact. So I think that's really what the moment means for us. I think we still feel very much like the underdogs, because I'm still on calls every week where the mindsets of the people on the calls are still back in 1980.
Yeah.
And so there's still a lot of work to do. And so one of the big things that we're really investing in besides Medicaid is our storytelling and our clinical org and our data, because I think, I sometimes get asked by people like, is this category called femtech, or is it women's and family health, or is it women's health, or is it family health? Like, is it Raquel called it Women Plus the other month? And to us, it is very much it's a women's and family health category where we serve the needs of families that are in those early years of either building one or growing one. Those families could be, all same-sex couples. They could be, all men. They could be all women. Then there's kids in the mix. So it's just a very, very unique time. And so we're going to continue to invest a ton in our clinical model, so that we're publishing a ton of studies around this is what the care looks like, and this is the type of care that all of these different types of populations need to be able to thrive. By the time the kids are a little bit older, they're in elementary school, and there's a job at play, there's a lot of health issues at play, and that uniqueness of our care model that brings together health plus care, that is really our model is what it is meeting the underserved needs of our population, and that's what it takes to thrive.
Well, you can see that I'm smiling. I always am when I get a chance to talk to you, which is often, but that's because I know and I've watched to see what it takes to create a whole category. And that's what you've done, and that's what we hoped you would do when we invested in you, which is to create the platform for women and families. And there's just no doubt in my mind that it has, as they say, legs forever. There's so much that can be done and added to it. It's just a matter of really picking priorities and continuing to build over time. The other thing, which you talked a lot about, but I'll just put a fine point on, is that the platform's always been built with a sense of outcomes in mind. So this is not a nice little app or a great little feature or something that people should buy to check the box. It's really about driving cost and quality outcomes and supporting families so that they can support their companies and support their the results that they're responsible for. So I want to thank you so much for your leadership in the company, for giving us an opportunity to support you, and for coming to see us today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you again. It's been a pleasure and an honor to work with you.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Kate.